Hey everyone, it's Adam back again from The Army Painter. We have something fun for you today in studio. Normally I am showing you how to paint models or talking about new products, and we're doing a little bit of that today, but instead of painting, we're going to show you how to assemble a model, specifically Acererak, the Lord of Unlife from the D&D Undead paint set. Now, we recently announced the 4th edition to the Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments range, and we obviously produced the tutorial how to paint it. We showed you how to paint our studio model, but we had a lot of questions from you. You wanted to know, how do you assemble it, and why does this model not come pre-assembled like the other models, Drist, the Owlbear, and Minsk and Boo? Well, for many of us hobbyists, assembling the models and converting miniatures is just as much of the hobby as painting them. So today, I'm going to show you how to take the model from this to this. We are going to be using some traditional hobby tools today that you can find from the full Army Painter range. You could find it on our tool rack at your friendly local games store. We're going to need some things like our hobby knife here, some clippers, a miniature model file, and you can use your choice of super glue or plastic glue. I like to use the plastic glue because it actually creates a chemical bond between the pieces of plastic that we are going to adhere together. Now, if you're a young hobbyist and just getting started out, I highly recommend that you ask your parents' permission before using any of these sharp objects like the cutter and the hobby knife. And if you're going to be using super glue, it's best to do it under your parents' supervision. So let's get started. While the model doesn't come with any formal instructions in the paint set, it is pretty simple to assemble, and all of the pieces are labeled out with numbers here. 1, we've got 2, 3, etc., all the way up to number 9. And the model is pretty simple to put together. You can follow along to this video if you have the box at home, and I'll give you just a little bit of extra guidance. So go ahead and grab your clippers first, and we're going to be cutting off one piece at a time here. We're going to start by cutting off piece number 1 on the sprue very carefully, like so. And once you have that piece, what you're going to want to do is just very carefully remove these little pieces on the edge. These are what we like to call flash in the hobby industry. These pieces of flash are where the mold connects and the plastic is injected into the mold, because all of these plastic, these high quality plastic models come from injection molding. Once you've removed the flash, go ahead and grab your flat-sided hobby file, your miniature model file, and just very gently sand down any of the rough edges on the side of the base. Now go ahead and find number 2 on the model. That's going to be in this lower right-hand part of the sprue, and very carefully clip off the model from the sprue, like so. Following the same guidelines as before, I'm just going to take my hobby knife and very carefully, I'm just going to pull some of this away. Now, you see I am pulling the blade towards me. That is somewhat of a no-no, but the way that I'm doing it, and you can see here as we close up to the model, I'm pulling it in a way that it won't cut my thumb. My thumb is rested down here away from the blade, and I'm just very carefully pulling off that extra bit of flash. Now on these larger items here, I can just very simply put the model against my cutting mat and cut down like so. And then you can go back and clean it up very simply. Now in some of these areas, there's going to be a little bit of extra flash and what we like to call mold lines. Those mold lines exist when they press the mold together, inject the plastic, and they're very, very faint and very subtle, but they will show up when you begin painting the model. So it's best to shave those pieces down now. And I've got my handy round file here, and I'm just going to very gently go ahead and shave down some of those areas where the mold lines exist. Now, it would make sense that pieces 1 and 2 would fit together, and they will, rightfully so, but for this one, I'm going to go ahead and cut off number 3 first and assemble that to piece number 2. So go ahead, find number 3 on the sprue, like so. Go ahead, give it a nice simple clip there. And we're going to clean that off just like we did the first 2 pieces with our hobby knife. And then we'll give it a just very simple file down to make sure it's nice and smooth and without imperfections. Now we're going to go on to moving the model together, and I'm going to recommend our plastic glue because the plastic glue will actually adhere the two pieces of plastic together. It forms a very strong, almost unbreakable chemical bond between the two pieces. Many hobbyists like to use an applicator. You can use a toothpick or maybe even an old brush. I'm going to use it right out of the bottle here. I'm going to use it very sparingly because you only need a little bit. Now the nice thing about plastic glue, especially for your young hobbyists out there, is that it won't actually bond to skin. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour a little bit of it on my skin like so. And just to showcase to you here, I'm going to hold it together tightly. There we go. It won't bond my skin together. You see a little bit of fuzziness there. We're just going to wipe that off. Make sure you rinse your hands afterwards and go ahead and give them a wash. Do not touch your eyes. This was just an experiment to prove to you that it won't bond your skin together like super glue will. So I'm going to go ahead and take piece number 2. And before I apply any glue, I'm going to look at the model and I'm going to do something called dry fitting. Now, dry fitting is pretty much you're fitting the model together dry without the glue. That way you can see how the areas match up before you go ahead and apply the glue. And when I do that, I can see that there's 2 little molded joints here. You have a female side and 2 male pegs right here, and we're just going to join those together. So that shows me that I want to apply my glue in these areas, and that's just what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to apply a very little bit. I'm going to start right there and work its way up, just like so. And very simply, I'll grab piece number 3 and I'll hold them together. And in about 10 seconds, you will have a pretty formidable bond here. So I'm just going to hold that together. And while I'm holding that together, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply some glue to the bottom of the model. I'm going to apply just a little bit to that square peg that fits right into the base, like so. I like to keep a paper towel handy just to wipe the nozzle of my glue off. You don't want that to clog up. If it does, no problem, go ahead and take a thumbtack or even just the very tip of your razor blade if you're very careful, just to remove some of that excess glue. Now that I've got those pieces together and the glue applied, I'm just going to go ahead and hold them together for just about 10 seconds. Again, 10 seconds about all you need. And there we go. We've got the first 3 pieces of our model assembled. Going back to the sprue now, and I'm going to cut off number 4 right here, just very simply. Careful here that we don't cut too far because we're going to need some of these joints to assemble the model in later stages. So I'm just going to take a look at the model, and you can see some of the areas, those mold lines are starting to flash off a little bit. Don't worry, we're going to get them in a second when we clean off the rest of the model. But very carefully here, I'm just going to lay this down very slightly on the cutting board and gently scrape away any of the excess flash on these smaller pieces. Again, following the guidelines that I shared with you before, I'm going to keep my thumb out of the way so I don't cut my thumb. That's a big no-no. Every hobbyist will eventually do it. We all have scars on our thumbs. It doesn't mean that you should just because you've done it before. So just very carefully, you want to use a sharp blade, believe it or not. The duller the blade, the more dangerous it can be because it can get stuck on the plastic. And when it gets stuck, if you're forcing it towards you, it can actually really work its way through that plastic and then jab you. You don't want that to happen, promise you. So once we have the excess pieces of flash removed, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go sand down these edges just to make sure we get a nice clean model here. And you can see this little piece here has just a little bit, just like a hair almost of plastic, and that's where these model files really come in handy. Once again, we're going to dry fit the model before we begin to apply the glue. This is going to be great because it helps you to get an idea of how the model assembles before you secure it in there. And as you can see right here, it just kind of slides in. You have this piece of rope wrapping around the back, and then this little peg goes right in there. So now we have a very good idea of how this model looks assembled. I'm going to apply a little bit of our plastic glue just inside, give it a good shake, make sure we get that paint down there and work down into the nozzle, like so. And again, I'm going to clean off that tip. This is why a lot of hobbyists like to use an applicator, but you don't necessarily need it. So there we go. We've applied the glue. I'm going to hold that piece to the model for about 10 seconds, and it will be bonded virtually for life. The other nice thing about using plastic glue is that if you have any gaps in the model, it almost autofills those gaps as the chemical bond happens. Just like the rest of the model, I'm going to cut out number 5. I'm going to give it a good trim here, make sure the piece is nice and clean. So as I look at the 2 pieces of the model, you can see that this piece fits right here up under the shoulder, and then there are 2 pegs there that will fit firmly inside. So I'm going to go ahead and give my plastic glue a little shake, make sure that glue has worked its way into the nozzle. I'm just going to apply a very little bit here, and some just right up there. Just very simply apply those 2 together. It's important this time when you go back to the sprue to make sure when you're cutting out piece number 6 that you're not cutting out piece number 9. So go ahead, make sure your numbers are correctly. There's a nice little guide arrow there to help you out in that department. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to grab my clippers, and I'm just going to begin removing item number 6 from the sprue. This is the front portion of the Lord of Unlife's torso, including his hands and his magical stave. And once that's sanded down and cleaned up, we're going to again dry fit the model. This time you've got a nice big round peg there on either side, and you can see how the shape is contoured to fit right in here. So I'm just going to dry fit that, and when I do, I find out that these pieces of robe hanging down actually are perfectly contoured there. So I'm going to apply a little bit of our glue underneath. So give your plastic glue a little shake, make sure it's worked its way down to the bottom of the nozzle, and we're just going to apply a little bit in there like so. Okay, clean off that nozzle once again. Grab item number 6. Because we've dry fitted, we knew exactly where it needed to go. We're just going to hold that there for about 10 seconds just to make sure everything is fit and in place perfectly. And we're almost done with the model. There's just a couple small more details left to assemble. These final 3 pieces are easily the trickiest part to assembling this model, so it's going to take just a fine bit of skill and patience to get these right. I'm going to go ahead and start by cutting out all 3 at once. So I have number 9 here, going a little bit backwards, but that's okay. These are the final 3 pieces, so the numbers don't matter quite so much at this point. Number 8, and then number 7. Number 7 here, this is Acererak's face, and you can see it is finely detailed. And there's a little bit of flash around the corners, and these pieces can be a little bit fragile because they are quite detailed, so be very patient here when you're clipping these and use a very gentle touch. Now that we've removed them, we're going to go ahead and clean off the pieces of flash very simply here. On this piece, it's pretty important because the face of Acererak is going to butt up against it, so we want to make sure that it's nice and flat and nice and clean. With items 8 and 9 removed and cleaned, we're just going to apply a dab of our plastic glue, just like so. I told you this is tricky. These are tiny pieces, a little bit too tiny for my hands. I'm just going to hold these tightly together, and I'm going to let that dry before I glue on the next bit, but that's okay because the next bit's going to take quite a bit of time. Now we've removed all of the pieces of sprue, so you can go ahead and recycle this. You can chop it up and use it as basing bits. I like to do that. These actually make for really great pieces when you're building terrain and dungeon tiles and things of that nature. Go ahead and cut them up, and they're great for extra modeling. So reduce, reuse, recycle if you can. I'm just going to set that aside for now, and I'm going to Acererak's face. And this is finely detailed, and I want you to be very careful here when removing these bits of flash. And this is where having a very sharp and a new blade is going to pay off, because you just want it to clean. You don't want to take chunks out of the model. You just want to pull off and pick off these little pieces of flash. And that should have given the pieces 8 and 9, that little joint there, some time to dry. I'm going to go ahead and apply a bit of our plastic glue. I'm going to clean off the nozzle one more time. I'm going to apply a little bit of plastic glue, just a dab or two right there. And then Acererak's face will mount right to the front almost perfectly. There is a little peg there. And there you go. You're just going to let that dry. Now, before you apply this to the model, go ahead, give that paint a few seconds to dry. That way it forms a nice, strong chemical bond. And when you have, it will form a very nice chemical bond. I'm going to take the model here. There's still a little bit of excess glue inside. That should be enough to hold it together, but just to be sure, I'm just going to apply a very simple dab of our plastic glue to the tip of that square peg. Go ahead, clean it up here. And I'm just gonna gently apply Acererak's face, and there we have it. Now, sometimes the plastic glue can be a little bit stringy. That's okay. That's just the nature of it. It's the nature of the chemicals working. Let it dry, and when it has, you can clean the model with an old brush and maybe even some lukewarm soapy water. When you're finished assembling the model, it's important that you take your hobby knife and go ahead and put that safety guard back on top. That way you don't have any accidents later on. And there you have it. Our Acererak model is completely assembled. It only took a few minutes and it's ready to be painted. Go ahead and make sure you give it a nice primer coat with either our Brush On Gray primer or one of the Army Painter color primer sprays to get you started. One of my favorite aspects of assembling my models is that it gives me some time to really get to know the model and get to see all of the details. So when I do begin to paint it, I know the model almost inside and out. If you're new to hobbying and new to painting and you haven't assembled model before, the new D&D Undead paint set gives you a great opportunity to give it a try thanks to the high quality plastic sprue provided by our friends at Gale Force 9. Remember that you can find this product and more from the Army Painter and the D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments range at your friendly local game store, online from your favorite online retailer such as Amazon, or at www.thearmypainter.com. We'll see you next time.